Happy Tuesday. Happy So What Day. I hope you're having a great start to your week. And for any of you who are watching for the first time, make sure to give me those thumbs up and those great emojis. Tell me where you're watching from and let me know if this is your first time watching. I'm Ellen March, and I'm the content director for Sulky of America. And today I have a really fun project to share with you because this Thursday is National Sewing Machine Day. That's right. So we've got to celebrate our sewing machines. And I have a great little project that features a sewing machine applique. And you can grab up that applique pattern absolutely free on the Sulky blog. I linked directly to that blog post in the description of the live stream post here today. So if you're not seeing that link to take you over to the blog, make sure that you hit that little see more or more button. That will pop out the entire description and you'll find that link to head on over to the blog and print your sewing machine applique templates. I will show you how they all come together, and I'm going to share with you a couple of projects you can create using this applique to celebrate National Sewing Machine Day. All right, but before we get started, it's been a very busy morning here at Sulky, both here where I am in my home office and, of course, at Sulky HQ, because our All the Towels embroidery session was activated this morning. So if you are a loyal So What viewer, you know I've been talking about this for quite some time, and today is finally the day where all the videos are available, all the designs are available for downloading, and you can watch all the tutorials for how to embroider all the towels. So if you haven't registered yet, once you register today, you'll have all access to the entire session, and we have put this on in partnership with Embroidery Library and Urban Threads. I absolutely love them. I'm telling you what, when I am, I have an idea for a project or maybe a theme for a design that I'm looking for, Embroidery Library and Urban Threads are one of the first sites that I head to because they have such a vast array of different types of designs, and I just really love their aesthetic. I'm always finding, more designs than I need. Of course, don't we all? It's kind of like fabric shopping. You might go to the fabric store with one type of fabric or color of fabric in mind. And do we ever just stop at that one fabric? I mean, I don't. So we might need a support group for fabricaholics or designaholics. And maybe that's what we are here at So What anyways, is we are here to support each other and to tell each other that more fabric is always better, right? More designs are always better. So anyways, with this embroidery sewing session, you will get the 5 designs that you see here on this image that I put on the screen. So you'll get the fruit popsicles. That is an applique design that's done in the hoop. You get the design that says, "You wash, I'll dry." A design that says, the secret ingredient is always love and butter. You'll also get this cute little flip-flops embossed design. I love using embossed designs on terry cloth towels. It's such a cute, unique, neat, special effect that you can create with thread. And then you will also get the freestanding lace corner design that is featured on this 100% linen towel. And if you haven't grabbed a kit for this session yet, don't worry, because we are restocking these kits. We're getting all the towels and all the threads and all the stabilizers that you need for this session because the kit sold out. And we want to make sure that everybody can get a kit for the special kit price too, because I think that you'll find if you grab up these stabilizers, grab up the thread, grab up all these towels, you're, in it to win it. You're spending a good amount of money. So we've kitted everything together to make the price much more palatable for everyone. And we want to make sure that you are able to grab up this kit. So once the kits are available for purchase, I'm going to be emailing everybody that has signed up so far for the session, and I will link directly to the kits so you'll have a chance again to grab one of those. It's a great, great value. And since you can watch these videos and interact with this session at any time, none of the content expires. Once you've registered for this, it lives in your personal library for all time, as long as you still have an account at sewingonline.sulky.com. So even if you get a kit in the next couple of weeks when they're back available for purchase, you can review all of that information or watch it for the first time if you would like, and go through all the lessons with your kit items in front of you. All right, so there's no missing out, and it's going to be a great time. There's a lot of people who have already jumped on and they're taking the course, and I have been answering questions all morning, and anyway, it's a great time. I'm really excited to hear the feedback that's been coming in because, as you know, I work on these sessions and our video casts and all of our special events about 6 or 8 months ahead of time. So when something launches, I get really excited that you all finally get to see what I've been working on and what everybody at Sulky's been working on. And there's just so much that goes into it. So I love the feedback. I love seeing your creations. I love hearing what you like and dislike and what we can improve upon for next time. So be sure to share that feedback with us as well. All right. Let's see. Ooh. Speaking of today's project, so I'm not really sure how to transition to this, but I'm going to give it a go. So today's project that I made out of the sewing machine applique design, which if you're just joining now, because I just noticed a bunch of people just hopped on the live stream. I don't know if my, if my software was populating late or whatever, but if you missed the beginning, we're talking about a sewing machine applique project today, and the sewing machine applique templates are entirely free. You can grab it up at the Sulky blog, and I link directly to that blog post so you can grab your sewing machine applique. It's a PDF. You can print it out, and you'll have all the pieces needed. I'm going to show you how to layer that applique and make a sewing machine out of it, and then give you tips for sewing it and creating something out of it. So what I created out of mine came out of a need, of course. I'm getting ready to go on our Sulky Ireland tour. So excited. I know a couple of you who are loyal Sew Up viewers are joining me there in Ireland, and we're leaving in about a month or so. And, the last trip I took, which was actually to Houston for Comic Palooza, I did a panel at this Comic Con, basically, in Houston called Comic Palooza. And I taught people how to work with cosplay fabrics, those really terrible to work with, slippery, stretchy, coated, all those great fabrics that we love for Halloween, but they're super difficult to sew. I did a whole panel on how to manage those fabrics, under your sewing machine, presser foot, and threads and stabilizers that help you work with those fabrics. But at any rate, when I went to that show, I realized I had no case for my iPad. I used to have one, and it's been commandeered by one of my children, of course. And now, of course, guess what? No one can find it. Wouldn't you know? Okay, so it has disappeared into thin air or left at school, or which tablets don't even go to school. I don't know how these things happen. Anyways, it's gone. So I realized when I was at Houston, I needed a case for my iPad. Of course, we're going to sew one. So I did not intend for this to be the project that I made out of using my sewing machine applique, but it was a happy accident. And I will tell you all how that happened as we go into the project. But all that to say, I'm getting ready for our Ireland trip. We are taking a great group of people, women and men. I believe there's a couple on the tour. And we already have our private Facebook group going so that we can get to know each other before we meet at JFK on our way to Ireland. And so we're all kind of talking and getting to know each other, which is really fun. So if you want to be a part of our next craft tours adventure with Sulky, you can join us on our trip to Bali in October. This is going to be such a fantastic tour. First off, we're going to be in Bali in October. And, you know, I don't know where you are in your neck of the woods, but you might already have snow in October, like I probably will here in Colorado. So it'll be nice to go to Bali, and, you know, be in, you know, a more tropical climate, if you will. That's first and foremost. But secondly, we're going to be learning all about batiks. We are going to learn how batiks are made. We're even going to do a workshop where we make our own batik fabric. And then I'm going to give you some project ideas for what to do with your fabric that you create if you so desire, or you can use a different fabric that you get at the Batik Expo that we're going to be going to, because we will be fabric shopping like no other. What I've heard is the prices are just incredible, and we're getting like the authentic stuff. So it's going to be a really, really amazing time in Bali. And that's really just like one day of excursions of this whole tour. There is so much packed into this tour, and you can check it out on the link that I put in the description of today's post. We will also populate that link in the chat, so you can head on over to the Craft Tours website and make sure that you're on the right Bali tour so that you can join Sulky, because there's a couple of other tours happening at the same time, or around the same time, I should say. So a great time to travel to Bali, and it's going to be awesome. And you can take your iPad case with you, because I'm finally going to have one that no one is going to steal, meaning my children. Okay. All right. So all that to say, here's what I came up with for my sewing machine applique project. Now, notice how you're only seeing a portion of my sewing machine applique. This was not intended. I actually set out to make a sewing machine sort of wall hanging that I was going to hang behind me here. And so I started out putting my applique onto a fat quarter. And I thought that would be a great size for little wall hanging. It would be great for the door of your craft room, or something like this. You could even add machine embroidery or applique letters, all kinds of things to it. So when I started out, I wanted to put that applique front and center on my fat quarter of fabric. So that's what I went about doing. But I ran into some snags along the way, and I'm going to tell you all about those so that you also don't experience those snags. So I had to pivot entirely on the project that I made. So I turned my fat quarter into a Hemingway pouch. I linked directly to the Hemingway pouch pattern if you're interested in making this as well. It has this really unique diagonal zipper, and it's seriously taking the world by storm. Every time I am looking at my Instagram feed, people are making these pouches. It takes one side of zipper tape, you fold it over and put your zipper pull on it, so that one tape, one side of the zipper tape is folded over. When you put the zipper on, it becomes one zipper, if you catch my drift. But at any rate, I made this Hemingway pouch a few weeks ago and showed you all how I repurposed a t-shirt for the fabric for this pouch. And I made it big enough for a laptop, because the t-shirt I was using belonged to my husband, and I was trying to preserve one of his favorite t-shirts and make it into something he could still get some use out of. So I did share that with you, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so. And if you missed that So What, you can find it on our YouTube channel on our So What playlist. You can also search for the Hemingway pouch on the Sulky blog, and you'll be able to find this project as well as the one that I did with the t-shirts. But at any rate, so I made this Hemingway pouch to size my husband's laptop, and the pattern comes in, I think, at least 4 sizes, maybe even 5. and I knew there was a size for a tablet. So since I had embellished this fabric already, I decided to turn mine into a Hemingway pouch because a fat quarter was about what I needed to create this exact size. So that's kind of like what happened in the progression of my intended project versus the project that I got. And actually, this is going to get a lot more use than a wall hanging, at least in my life, because I'm constantly taking my tablet different places. So super useful. But had I intended to make this size of the Hemingway pouch using this applique, obviously I would have positioned my applique on my fabric so that my applique was centered along the front or along the back, if you will. So we'll get into that as well. All right. Also, I should mention, put your comments, put your questions, talk to me in the live chat, because that's all you have to do to be automatically eligible to win today's gift from Sulky, which is a 1-yard pack of Sulky Perfect Applique Fusible Web. That's right. So as long as you are commenting, giving me those great emojis, somehow interacting with me during today's So What, you will be automatically eligible to win that gift. I will pick one winner at random to receive that gift from Sulky. And I do have a unique way of identifying myself and finding you, as long as you have liked our Facebook page if you're watching there, or subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're watching there. So a lot of the times people are asking me, how do I win? How do you pick the winners? This and that. So what happens is, as long as you are engaging with the post, I pull all of those names. I assign a random number to them with a random number generator. And then we pick a random number from those numbers. I go and see whose name is associated with that. And then I contact you in my unique way to filter out all of those spam bots that like to, tell you you've won something when you haven't really. They're really ruining this for all of us. So at any rate, that's how the random winner is chosen. It's completely luck of the draw. I've had somebody win a couple of times, actually, surprisingly, because of just how randomized it is. So as long as you're doing that, you're in the pool to win some Sulky Perfect Applique Fusible Web. Now, this fusible web, of course, we're going to use it for our sewing machine applique because we want to create the perfect applique. What I really love about this fusible web is that it's extremely lightweight, but it's still super strong. So when you're applying it to your fabric, especially something like a quilt or a quilty project like I created here, look how it just moves with the fabric. You can't even tell that there's any adhesive behind this applique at all. It is so incredibly lightweight that your fabrics just kind of melt into each other. Even when you're doing a layered applique that might have, a background and then maybe a, animal on the foreground, and then there's eyes for the animal, and all these are separate appliques that you're layering. Even when you're layering these multiple pieces of fabric, it's still very lightweight and pliable. Doesn't affect the hand of your fabric. So it's really, really great stuff. If you haven't used it before, I highly suggest you give it a try. It comes in 1 yard, 3 yard, and by the bolt sizes. So if you're super into applique, grab it up on the bolt when we're having a great sale, and you'll be good to go for quite a while for a lot of projects. All right, so, and yes, I use it for other things as well. I use it for like fusible hem tape. I'll cut strips of it, just all kinds of things. It just comes in handy for so many things. All right, so let's get to our sewing machine applique. First off, you're going to head to that blog post and you're going to print out your sewing machine applique. Notice how, there's not very many pieces to this applique. You could do it in a print fabric. You could do all the sewing machine parts, the sewing machine bed and the arm. in one fabric, and then you can do your tension dial and, you know, your needle up, down, whatever, little buttons in a different fabric. I chose a different solid coordinating fabric for each piece of the applique. So there's 4 pieces that you're going to cut out. But you do you, pick the fabrics that speak to you and how you want to best represent your sewing machine. So you will grab this PDF from the Sulky blog, print it out, and then instead of cutting out the pieces, I preserve this because the little needle, the little thread guide, etc., that's going to be decorative stitching or straight stitching that we add after we have fused the applique. So we're going to need to refer back to this pattern to transfer those lines to our fabric so that we can sew over them. It's also helpful to keep this, printout or PDF so that you can refer to the placement of each piece and how they are layered over each other. So for example, the machine arm has a little bit of overlap. It goes underneath the sewing machine bed. You get the idea. All right, so instead of cutting those apart, we're going to leave our paper pattern intact, and we will transfer the different applique sections, the 4 pieces, onto the wrong side of our fusible web. Since you can basically see through it, you'll be able to easily just trace them, and then you can keep your paper applique pattern intact. So these are the fabrics that I chose for my background, as well as the 4 parts of the sewing machine applique. And you can find these little fat quarter bundles at your fabric store or your local quilt shop. I love when they have already brought these complementary colors together for you. I love a pre-cut, you know what I mean? It just makes it so much easier. You don't have to go hunting around for the perfect blue or the perfect green. So I grabbed up this fat quarter bundle, and it was just perfect for putting all of these elements together. I chose the lightest fabric for the background, and then the other 4, I just, kind of visually decided which ones I wanted where for which parts of the sewing machine. So that's really handy if you just grab up 5 fat quarters, but obviously for the little dial, for the little hand wheel, you really just need a fabric scrap. So you can dive into your stash and see if you have some complementary colors. And again, you don't have to use solids either. You could use a print fabric for the backing or background rather, and choose your own adventure. You will also need a backing fabric, which for me became my lining fabric for the Hemingway pouch. But if you're making this into a pillow or a wall hanging, then of course you will also need your either pillow back fabric or your quilt backing, etc. All right. So we are going to trace the mirror image of our sewing machine pieces onto the paper side of the fusible web. This way, after we cut out the pieces, after fusing our fusible web to the wrong side of the fabric, we will flip them over and they will be facing the correct direction, as if we are looking at our sewing machine. So be sure to trace the mirror image onto the paper side of your fusible web. And you'll notice, let me go back to the pattern here. Oops, that's not the pattern. You'll notice that the line weight is very thick on this applique pattern. I actually did that on purpose so that when you turn your piece of paper over, you could still see through it to trace the mirror image. All right. So that just helps me not strain my eyes as much, but you could also use a light box. And I want to share with you my daylight wafer light box. We have these at sulky.com. They're actually in limited quantities right now. I think we have a new order going through. They come in 2 sizes. I have the largest size. It's very helpful for applique projects like this, especially when you're going to, why do I keep going back to this picture? Especially when you're going to assemble your pieces. If it was a more intricate applique, you could put your template behind your fabric, put your fabric over the top, and then place your pieces and layer them using the light box to show you exactly where each piece goes. And that really takes the guesswork out of, oh, how do I center the little tension dial on my sewing machine? It's just right there for you, and you can see through your fabric because you're using a light box. Now, again, this has a very heavy line weight to it. So depending on the fabric that you've chosen for your background fabric, you'll probably be able to see through it anyways to place your items. But again, if you're working with a different applique pattern or a more intricate layered applique, you might find this light box to be helpful to you. So let me grab mine so I can show you, because it is really that simple. And of course, it's plugged in over here. Okay, so I just turned it on kind of accidentally because it's so easy to turn on and off. First off, can you believe I'm holding a light box right now? Back in the day, light boxes were like these ginormous pieces of equipment. It was like a huge table, excuse me, or a secondary table that you'd put on your work surface to use. But this is the Daylight Wafer light box. Yeah, that's why it's called a wafer, because it's wafer thin. They are so incredibly amazing to use. They've got ruler lines on here to help you place things. So when you turn it on, it remembers the light level that you used the last time you were using it. I always have mine up all the way that it goes, but if you want to dim it, you just press on the power button and dim it all the way. Press it again to turn the light up. And then when you hit this power button, which is so easy, it will remember your light level. I mean, it's the coolest thing. I jump at the chance to use it anytime that I can. My kids want to steal it, but they are not allowed. We also have these cool cutting mats that are made and sized directly to fit on top of your light box. So once you turn it on, you can cut your fabric strips, you can cut your appliques, whatever, using a rotary cutter, clear ruler, using the gridded mat that fits right on here, and it doesn't damage your light box at all. So that's a really cool add-on accessory. If you're going to pull the trigger and grab one of these, you might as well get that cutting mat as well. So cool. And, you know, I think I use it most often for applique projects, but I have started cutting my fabric strips, cutting my, half square triangles for my flying geese, things like this, using that because, again, my eyes are starting to fail me. And just the added light is so helpful. So at any rate, I wanted to let you all know about the Daylight Wafer light boxes. Again, they're in two sizes. Grab up the largest one you can afford. Grab up one of those cutting mats, and honestly, you will not regret it. All right, so back to our applique pieces. We're going to fuse our fusible web, our perfect applique fusible web, to each one of our fabric pieces on the wrong side. Now, do I pre-wash the fabric? Should I pre-wash the fabric before, this project? There's so many schools of thought on this. Lots of people don't like pre-washing because they want their fabric to have that kind of coating or manufacturer's sort of starch or whatever to it. I've heard that from even, some of the most prolific quilters out there don't pre-wash their fabrics. Some do because they know they're going to be washing this item a lot. They want to pre-shrink, especially if they're using 100% cotton fabrics. So the choice is yours. All right, so you're going to fuse your fusible web to the wrong side of each fabric, and then we're just going to cut out each piece. We still have the paper intact, and we are going to build our sewing machine applique onto our background fabric. So we'll take the paper backing off of the fusible web, and before we fuse anything, we're going to assemble the sewing machine applique. So you can use your printed pattern and just use it as a guide to place all of your pieces where you want them on your fabric. Again, I centered mine right on my fat quarter. I had my fat quarter oriented horizontally and just centered my sewing machine because I had intended this as a wall hanging. This might be exactly where you want it if you're making a pillow as well. Now, if you're making the Hemingway pouch, though, you're going to want to plan where you place this applique so that when you have your diagonal cut along the upper edge of your fat quarter or whatever size of Hemingway pouch you're making, your applique is centered along either the right or the left side of the pouch, depending on where you want to display the applique. So have the foresight to place your applique so that it's nicely displayed front and center on whatever project you are working on. All right, so once we get it all assembled, you can also, as I mentioned, use your light box. Put your background fabric on the light box with your pattern underneath it, and then place each fabric, layering it so that, the base is on top, etc., and using that as your guide. Then you will remove your fabric, take it to your pressing surface, and fuse your applique down. If you're worried about moving it because you've used a light box, you can use Sulky KK2000, our temporary spray adhesive, and you can just give it a little shot on the back of the KK2000 so that nothing shifts on your way to the pressing mat. Or you can build it on your pressing mat without using a light box and just fuse it when you get it to where you want it. All right. So now it's time to decide on our thread. First off, we're going to sew our applique in place. Then we're going to add some quilting to the piece. So I wanted to use a 30 weight blendables thread for my quilting, and I decided to use it for sewing my applique pieces down as well. Now this is a raw edge applique, so we're going to stitch just inside of the edges of our fabric pieces. We're going to sew around every single one of them, and I chose this 30 weight blendables so that I would have a lot of color running over the piece, and I love to use a blendables thread. I mean, I love to use it all the time, but particularly when I'm working with a bunch of solid fabrics, because it just puts all of those colors that are in my fabric pieces onto the background and everything flows together so nicely. So first off, I chose this sort of darker teal 30 weight blendables thread. It is a 30 weight thread, so you need a little bit bigger needle eye. You'll need a 9014 needle. And, when you're looking at thread on the spool, it's kind of concentrated, if you will, right? So all of the fabrics are in their most vibrant on the spool because there's so much thread on there. So if you take out a length of thread and kind of place it over your applique, drape it over the background fabric, then you can really get an idea of how it's going to look once you've added the stitches to your fabrics. So once I did that, I decided this was way too dark for my background fabric. It just looked a little bit off. So I ended up choosing this much, much lighter thread. Even though both of these threads have the colors that I'm using, this lighter one, once I draped it over the piece, just looked more aesthetically pleasing. I don't know how else to say it other than the darkest hue in that darker teal blendables thread just was giving me the wrong vibes. So I ended up going with this lighter blendables thread. And doesn't it just look amazing when you stand back and kind of look at it with all the threads that you have going on. So I highly suggest you might grab up a thread, even if you're at Joann's looking at the Sulky displays or whatever. Just unwind a little bit of it and place it over the fabric that you're intending to buy. Then wind it back up, and that's a really great way of auditioning your thread, especially when you're doing decorative work like this or quilting. All right, so to prepare my fabric for sewing the applique and also for quilting my piece later, I added soft and sheer stabilizer to the wrong side of my background fabric. This stabilizes the fabric for the applique, and in the little sections where I add the detail work for the spool pin and for the needle, I chose a satin stitch, and I didn't want the fabric to do any tunneling underneath the satin stitches, you know, where like your fabric will kind of dip in and then it'll cause a little bit of a pucker on the beginning or end of your row of satin stitches. That's called tunneling. We don't want that, of course. So adding this soft and sheer is going to make sure our fabric is stabilized. It's nice and flat for our applique stitching. And it's very helpful too if you're going to choose a decorative stitch to sew on your applique pieces. I know raw edge applique isn't for everyone. You could certainly do a satin stitch around the entire sewing machine and the little details as well. That would cover up those raw edges. Or you could choose a fun decorative stitch. Maybe you have a decorative stitch that's like the shape of a scissors. That would be so cute, putting that somewhere on this applique. So we'll take a piece of soft and sheer and we're going to line the whole background fabric with it, because we're also going to use that stabilizer throughout the quilting process for the piece, whether we're making a wall hanging, a pillow front, or this Hemingway pouch. All of those get quilting. And the quilting kind of fills in the blanks. You know, it adds a lot of interest to our finished piece. I mean, you could also use machine embroidery along, you know, the base of the machine. You can write Ellen's sewing space or whatever if you wanted to put that on the wall of your craft room, something like that. So we're going to add the soft and sheer, and I just use the soft and sheer and I spray it a little bit with KK2000, and then I place my background fabric over the top, smooth the edges so it's nice and flat, and then I can head to the sewing machine. Nothing's going to shift. My layers are going to be acting as one because of that KK2000 that's added. Once I'm at the sewing machine, I can start stitching along my lines, but first I need to transfer my little spool pin, my needle, my thread guide, those little lines that are on our sewing machine applique PDF. We're going to transfer those to the fabric right side. I'm using a friction highlighter. If you got our last mystery box, which was our spring mystery box, mega mystery box, you got a pack of 3 or 4, I can't remember, of these friction highlighter pens. I love using these. Now, you might be familiar with the ballpoint type of friction pen, and sometimes I feel like that extra, you know, pointiness of the marking pen can kind of like etch into your fabric fibers, depending on what fabric you're using. So I really like these highlighter ones because they disappear with the heat of an iron, and they don't imprint, like they don't, you know, kind of scar or scratch the fabric fibers like some of those more ballpoint friction markers can do if you have a heavy hand at it. So I'm really kind of loving these more highlightery friction pens that are removable with heat of an iron. All right, so you'll want to transfer these lines, and you'll see on this picture that I can't really see the lines very well, even though my background fabric is really light colored. So since you only have a few lines to transfer, you can kind of just use your pattern as a guide and draw your lines. Use a, you know, small clear ruler, or you can use your light box, right? And you can transfer those lines so that they're absolutely perfect. Here I am using the light box, and look how we can see the lines so much better now. So I've transferred those lines using my removable fabric marker. And I started with my satin stitching along those lines. I picked a narrow satin stitch and I just sewed right across those lines. Now, before I added the satin stitch, I did a little straight stitch along all the lines, and then I added my satin stitch over the top of it because my thread line gave me just a little bit better visual on, where to place my zig and my zag of the satin stitch. So however it works best for you. And I don't know why I have my Teflon foot on the machine, other than I was probably using it for a different project and switched right on over to this one and completely forgot to change it. But no harm, no foul. My Teflon foot still has that red line in the center that I can place right along my marked line so that I know my satin stitch is going to go on either side of it. All right, so you can see the cool effect you get from these blendable threads is so evident when you're doing a satin stitch. You can see there's a little bit of that yellow going into the teal, going into the green, and it looks really, really neat. So I did all the lines in this satin stitch, and I did that first. You'll see that I stopped right along the fabric edge for all of these lines. And there's my little needle that I did out of the blendables. I love that these colors just blend together. It's so cool. So after that, I'm going to straight stitch along my entire sewing machine edge and then along some of the areas where these pieces overlap. This is where you could do the same satin stitch, or you can use a decorative stitch, or you can do what I did and do a straight stitch just inside of your fabric edge. So here is our applique all sewn. Everything is, nice and secure now, and we have our little decorative, excuse me, we have our little decorative lines added. So now it's time to add the quilting. All right, you can do so many different quilting ideas. I'm going to share mine, but first off, of course, we have to add our batting and our backing for the quilting. And, if you want your sewing machine applique on your backing, to show on your backing, you could create your quilt sandwich before adding your applique. However, since I thought this was going to be a wall hanging, I didn't want my satin stitch areas and things like that showing up on the back side of the quilt. So that's why I just had my softened sheer on the back when I was doing the applique. And now I'm going to add my batting and my backing using the KK2000 to just spray baste everything together. Now I decided to quilt this in the hoop of my embroidery machine because first off, super fun, super easy, looks very professional, looks like I'm an expert long armer and my machine's doing all the work for me. Also, I happen to have this fantastic sewing themed edge-to-edge quilting design because it was part of our quilty wall hanging sewing session with Designs by Juju. So I went back to my design files for that session, loaded them up again into my machine, and I chose the size that was vertical, so spanning my largest hoop size and vertical. Now with the quilty wall hanging session, you get a sewing machine applique that has a 3D element on it. You also get these end-to-end quilting designs in this sewing themed. So you get a little sewing machine and a thread spool, and they all come together in these swirls, and it's such a great design from Designs by Juju. If you want to learn more about quilting in the hoop and using these types of designs and which sizes are right for you and the hoop parameters that you have, how to seamlessly join the beginning and end of an end-to-end quilting design from Designs by Juju, definitely register for the quilty wall hanging session because you get all the files, you get a different sewing machine applique with a 3D element on it. You could even use that piece to create your Hemingway pouch. Just, size it accordingly. And it's a little bit more quilty. It's got some friendship star elements to the design as well. But you also get all the video tutorials from Designs by Juju. So you can refer to those while you are doing your quilting in the hoop. It's extremely invaluable. I went back to some of the videos just to remind myself how to hoop it, what size I needed, etc. Super helpful. I highly recommend that. All right, so I'm using a magnetic hoop, and I really love using these hoops for quilting in the hoop because I can hoop my entire quilt sandwich. Even if I'm using a super, super thick batting, I can get it all in my magnetic hoop, because what's happening is my back hoop and front hoop are just secured together like this with magnets, instead of my inner hoop being, pushed into my outer hoop, causing puckers. Sometimes, the hoop is too tight. You do your design, you pop it out, and all of a sudden what was once flat is no longer. Or in something like this, where we've got multiple layers and a thick batting, you can't even get it in the hoop. So then you have to do hoopless embroidery methods, all this. The magnetic hoop eliminates all of that because you simply use the magnets and put your hoops together. So I have the whole thing hooped, and I started in the middle, and then I worked outward to either side. So I did one stitch out in the middle of the piece, then I hooped the right side, joining up my beginning and end lines, referring to the videos in that session, did my second hooping, and then I did a third hooping along the left side. That way I was sure that everything in the middle was going to look great, and then I worked outward from there. Some people like to work, let's say, on the left or right side and keep doing subsequent stitch outs that way. So it's really whatever works better for you, but I highly suggest refer to those videos because you're going to be learning from the designer who created these, and from Becky Thompson from Power Tools with Thread. So there's a lot of video tutorial and tips and tricks from them to get the best result. All right, so now that we have it in the hoop, you can see here is my stitch out going all on its own. My machine is doing all the work for me. So here is where I hit another snag. So I'm glad I can, hit all the snags and then tell you all how to not hit the snags when you do it. So I did my center stitch out. I took everything out of the hoop, and I was going to reposition everything to create my second stitch out. And I looked at the back of my fabric, and I had all kinds of eyelashing. You see this? So my tension was off. Now, I have done this stitch out in the past. I created the quilty wall hanging. I've used it for a different project as well. So I just did exactly what I did the other times that I've done this design. So the only thing I can think of is that I used the 30 weight thread in the bobbin this time instead of a 50 or 60 weight thread, so that the pretty blendables would be on the wrong side of the piece. And I didn't even think about testing it out. Of course, I just sewed it right on what would be my finished wall hanging. When I turned this over, I was appalled. I was like, this cannot be my finished wall hanging, because somebody's going to come over and look at the back side and it looks terrible. Okay, so I guess it's not that terrible, but I was not happy with the eyelashing and the pulling of the bobbin thread on the wrong side. So I made some stitch adjustments, did a test. I had to take my tension from 50, which is what it's normally set at, all the way to 80 in order to get a balanced stitch. Now, I also was using a much thicker batting as well than I normally do because I had this leftover piece. It was a high loft batting, and normally I say use a low loft batting and one that's not so sort of fluffy. But I had this extra piece, so I used it here. So it was really a comedy of errors. I had a lot of things that led up to my problems. All right, so I know this says 85 here. This is just me testing things out. I went all the way up to 85, did a test, and then I worked my way back from there. I had it at 60, 70. You get the idea. 80 was the sweet spot for me based on my sort of combination of fabrics and threads and all of that. Once I had it on 80, my thread looked great from the top and my thread looked great from the bottom. The other thing and reason why we need to make tension adjustments when we're quilting in the hoop using a heavy weight thread like a 30 weight blendables is because in machine embroidery, in a, let's say, normal standard flat design, a balance stitch is a stitch that you can actually see your upper thread a little bit on the wrong side of your work. If you've ever done just a standard machine embroidery design, turned it over to remove your stabilizer, you'll see your bobbin thread and a little bit of that top thread showing. That's so that when you're looking at it from the right side, your thread is almost like popping off of the surface. That's how you know you have a balanced stitch, is when you can see a little bit of that thread on the wrong side. Completely different from when you're quilting or doing regular sewing. When you're doing those things, a balanced stitch is where you don't see bobbin thread on the top and you don't see top thread on the bobbin or on the bottom. So I had to do some adjustments since I was doing a quilting design and I didn't want that thread to wrap around to the back, right? So once I had this all figured out, everything looked great. But I still had that center stitch out where you could see all of that eyelashing. And I just couldn't let it go. And I did not want to pick out all of those threads. And I felt like my applique would then be compromised because, I would be ripping out threads, creating holes in the fabric, and I would never be able to match up that center design to the threads that I picked out. I mean, maybe, but it would be so arduous. So I decided to shift my finished project and create the Hemingway pouch so that the interior where the eyelashing is on the inside of my bag, and no one but me will see it when I'm using my iPad. So that is why I shifted gears from making a wall hanging to making the Hemingway pouch, all because of tension. All right, so speaking of Hemingway pouch, this is what I mean by centering your applique and having the foresight to the project that you're making, okay? So since I originally intended to make a wall hanging, my applique is in the center of my fat quarter. But now to create the Hemingway pouch, I've got to cut this diagonal line where my zipper is going to go, because the top corner edge that you see on the left side of the screen here gets wrapped around and folded over to become this edge right here. So now my applique is only shown a little bit on the front and back, which is kind of a bummer. I wish it was centered right here on the front of the pouch. It would be so much prettier, but it's still cool. It still has the nod to National Sewing Machine Day. And now the quilting is really the star, right? I've got my quilted sewing machine, my thread spools all showing. So I'm still happy with it, even though it isn't exactly how I would have wanted it. All right. So here you can see a little bit better that I'm only seeing a hint of my sewing machine from the zipper side, and then about 2/3 of the sewing machine on the back of the pouch project. But at least my project wasn't a lost cause. I didn't have to, throw it into a scrap bin after all that work. I just shifted gears and turned it into something else. So you can use this applique to make a pillow. You can use this applique to make a wall hanging. You can use this applique to make a fun quilt, make it the center focal point of the quilt, put some other sewing machine related phrases, maybe from our Love to Sew machine embroidery palette, all across the quilted piece. Create a cute crafty table runner, something like this, or a simple pouch as well. So lots of things can be created with this sewing machine applique. And if you are interested in this exclusive, it's called the Sulky Quilt end-to-end quilting design from Designs by Juju. It is available within our quilty wall hanging session at sewingonline.sulky.com. So if you are part of our towels session, or if you've done a webinar or video cast with us in the past, just log into your account over there at sewingonline.sulky.com, and you can add the quilty wall hanging to your personal library and have access to all these files so that you too can use this sewing machine end-to-end quilting design to complement your sewing machine applique. All right. What machine are you using? My magnetic hoops don't look like yours. Oh, great question. So I use a Husqvarna Viking Designer Epic 2. And when you go to grab your magnetic hoop at sulky.com, it will ask you your machine brand, and then it will ask you the model of your machine. And then you will have a drop-down list of hoop sizes that are available for that brand, make, and model of machine. So, from a Janome to a Viking to a Pfaff, all the brands are on there. You just have to select your particular machine to know if it's compatible with these types of hoops, and then you can choose your size from there. So yours might look a little different based on the brand or the size that you're using. I also don't have the placement stickers on the sides of a lot of my hoops. I have it on one of my hoops that I use most often, but there's also instructions for how to place your placement stickers so that you have, your gridded lines for perfect placement. So that's also why they might look a little bit different. We'll see. All right. And Sheila says, we don't call that an error. It is a design choice. Yes, exactly. I would only tell you all here about all of my mistakes. I'm never going to tell anybody else. This is how it was always meant to be, right? Just a nod to a sewing machine applique. Good point. Good point. Maybe you could have added an inner pocket to further cover the eyelashing. Totally. I definitely could have done that. Now it was already quilted together, so I would have to get creative or hand sew that pocket so that it only went through the backing fabric and not over to the front, but great idea as well. Sheila says, I'm always scared to adjust my tension. I am too, to be quite honest. I hate messing with it. There are ways where you can record where you had it before. In the case of my machine, I have an area where I can do temporary settings. Also, when I adjust the tension on something how I did on the machine screen, the next time I go to flip my machine on, it'll go back to the standard settings because that's how I have it set up. But if you have a manual tension dial, you can use, let's say, a highlighter or a removable pen or something like this, and just kind of put a dot where your tension dial was before you moved it. And then you can move it back and just remove that little dot, unless you want it there all the time, because then it'll show you what the standard setting is for when you're fiddling around with it. All right. Thanks for a modern sewing machine pattern. I will be using this for several projects. That's great. Love my magnetic hoops. I barely use my regular hoops anymore. Me too, to be quite honest. They are so much easier to use, and I have such great results with them. I hardly ever use my standard hoops. Honestly, unless I'm doing a tutorial where I want to show people, here's how you use your standard hoop. Here's how you overcome these hoop obstacles. Because let's face it, when you're using a standard hoops, you have a lot more obstacles to overcome with heavyweight fabric that can't be hooped because of a nap, like a towel. And, fabrics that don't fit in the hoop, but you want to use a large scale design that spans this whole area, let's say. So there are some, creative ways of using those standard hoops still to get the results that we want. And most of us have those standard hoops, so those are the times where I use it. But man, quilting in the hoop, using these end-to-end or endless designs, sometimes they're called, definitely try it with these magnetic hoops. It is a game changer. All right. You could also make a machine cover. That is a great idea. Making a sewing machine cover using your sewing machine applique, quilting it up. We actually have a really great sewing machine cover tutorial on the Sulky blog as well. You can just go to blog.sulky.com, search up sewing machine cover. Has a little embroidered pocket on the front, some little ties that you use to secure it around your machine. So that is a really great resource as well. All right. Well, thank you for all of your great comments and questions and suggestions. I really appreciate it. And go enjoy that towel course if you've registered for it. And if you haven't, check it out at sewingonline.sulky.com. Start watching those videos and let me know what you think. And you can also find our quilty wall hanging session there as well, where you can grab up these great quilting themed or sewing themed quilt designs. And be sure to grab up your free sewing machine applique PDF as well. Lots of things to get your creative juices flowing on this Tuesday. So be sure to join me next week right here, either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you choose to watch us. And I'll see you next Tuesday for another So What?